Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime video. I am so happy that you are here. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today, you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the murders of two 17-year-olds out of Roswell, Georgia, named Natalie Henderson and Carter Davis. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. All right, with all that, let's go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that I had never heard of before, but it is a case that I, stumbled upon while researching another case that was, I believe, in the same area, at least in the same state. And when I heard about this case, I felt compelled to read further. It hit a very special sort of nerve, and it is incredibly tragic. It just seems like one of those cases where it could have been done, like it could have been avoided if proper steps were taken, or if mental health services had been administered to the person who did this to these teenagers. And it's also, I think, a cautionary tale in two different ways. First, for parents to see that by not giving your children the proper upbringing, and by basically anything bad you do in your children's lives, especially when they're young kids, will have an avalanche of, or can cause an avalanche of shitty things to happen to them as adults, A. And B, for young kids, just be vigilant, to stay safe, to not sneak out, because it seems like it shouldn't be this way. It should not be this way. You should be able to just go and do things and feel safe. But the world can be such a dangerous place. And random acts of violence do happen. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kick around in your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer once you have something to go on. But the question of the day is this. What do you think could have been done to avoid this from happening? It seems like there has to be something. It seems like there were so many red flags that were ignored, by law enforcement. It's just what is the solution here? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. And now with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murders of 17-year-old Natalie Henderson and 17-year-old Carter Davis. So our case today begins on the warm summer morning of August 1st, 2016, and this is in the area of the North Fulton County in Roswell, Georgia. It's just before 6 a.m. when a delivery driver is making their normal delivery that they always do, and this is to a grocery store, and the grocery store is called Publix, and this Publix was on Woodstock Road. Now, it should have been a totally normal morning. This is something, if you've ever been to a store early in the morning, you see these big trucks dropping off bread and things like that. But this was anything but, because when this driver got to the store to start unloading what they had to unload, they saw that there were two bodies in the wooded area behind this Publix grocery store. Police were, of course, called, and reportedly due to the commotion of these two bodies being found behind the store, a lot of locals came out. There were a lot of people at the scene when police got there. So when police did get there, they were actually met with some anxious parents whose kids were missing. They said as far as they knew, when they had went to bed that night, their kids were in their homes sleeping in their beds, and that when they woke up in the morning, they were not there. And these kids were 17-year-old Natalie Henderson and her friend, 17-year-old Carter Davis, who were supposedly very good kids, very just normal, average teenagers, and put to their families anything but normal or average. They were exceptional. They weren't the type of kids who had any problem with anyone. So there's no reason why this should have happened to them. Now, let's talk about who these kids were, what happened to them, and then the aftermath of trial and all of that. So let's start with Natalie Henderson. She was born on December 15th, 1998, which sounds far too young for a person born in 1998 to no longer be with us anymore, but that is the reality of the situation. And she was one of two daughters that were born to Suzanne and Matthew Henderson. She was said to have been a very typical teenage girl filled with energy. She was the type of girl that her friend Shell said could walk into any room and brighten up anyone's day. She was said to be, quote, whip smart, funny, sassy, and strong, end quote, a true sweet Southern belle who literally did not have a problem with anyone. Her friends say they loved the way she would giggle and give warm hugs, and she was just the type of person who brightened up the day of any person that she came across. In addition to being very smart, because she was on the honor roll at Roswell High School, which was actually right across the street from the shopping center where the Publix was, where she would later be found killed. She was also very talented. She could sing, she could play guitar, and I actually saw a video of her in one of the news reports that I read, like online, that showed her singing and playing the guitar, and she was clearly very talented. She had a very pretty voice. She was also a lifeguard for Swim Atlanta and a leader in the school's color guard, which was apparently very important to her. One of her good friends said that she lived and breathed color guard. She was this little cute, like fun-sized girl who was passionate and beautiful and sassy and strong, but also soft. You know, she loved animals and volunteered at a rescue organization. And she loved them so much that after she was killed, her family asked that instead of flowers, people make a donation to Companion Animal Connection and Waleska. Waleska? Waleska. Waleska. She was the type of person who was unapologetically herself, which was very unusual and rare for somebody as young as she was. And she was said to just have a, quote, infectious zest for life, which may be what attracted her or what made her attractive to 17-year-old Carter Davis. So Carter was a bit of the new kid in school, at least compared to Natalie. He was actually from South Dakota, from Rapid City, South Dakota specifically, but his family had moved to Georgia. And at the time that he was killed, he was about to start his senior year at the nearby River Ridge High School. Yeah, River Ridge High School. He was born on July 29th, 1999 to parents Jeremy and Michelle Davis. And based on his obituary, it seems like he may have actually been their only child, which is just so incredibly sad. I just truly can't imagine what that would be like. And he just seemed like such a good kid. They both seemed like such good kids. He was said to be a kid who made his family proud and really just lived his life to the fullest. He was said to be both a really good student who was always willing to help his classmates, with the River Ridge High School's principal releasing a statement after his murder where he said in part, quote, Carter was an energetic student who was known as a friend to all. He always came to class in a good mood and with a smile on his face. And he was also, this is the end of the quote, he was also said, in addition to being that, to being just like an excellent athlete. He played lots of sports like soccer, football, and lacrosse in both South Dakota and Georgia. And he was said to be like the star athlete. And he was even called by a lot of his teammates Coach Carter, because he was such like a person to look up to in the team, like the person that people would go to for help and things like that. And his loss devastated his teammates. I guess his old teammates in South Dakota, who called him Georgia, by the way, that was his nickname because he was the guy who moved to Georgia. After he was killed, they actually wore stickers of his number, like I guess helmet stickers is a thing. And so they wore stickers with his jersey number on their helmets in his honor. It's just heartbreaking, man. These kids were so young and they seemed to be so loved and happy and talented and fun-loving, and now they were just gone. And it seemed that every person who knew them was having trouble dealing with that. And at this age too, at the age of 17, to have this happen, there are so many kids who are also affected, right? Because this is the time when you just have like a million friends, and this is also the formative years where you're just figuring things out. And this was very difficult for them to learn and to deal with and find that they are not as invincible as they thought they were. Both of these kids, both Natalie and Carter, were going to be seniors. They were about to finish school and start their lives. And now they were just gone. And these kids who were going to be coming back to school with them, like school was about to start. Everybody was about to come and just everything seemed so new. And now they were coming on the first day of school and finding out that this had happened. It was just very difficult. They even had grief counselors on site at both high schools to help kids and staff cope with kids learning in this moment that like the world really is tough and it's not fair. There were vigils held in the honor of both kids with hundreds of people coming out who, you know, like hugged each other and lit candles and remembered the lives of the two that were taken just way too soon. One of Natalie's closest friends, her name was Emma, she spoke at the vigil, and she just said that in learning what happened to her friend, it just completely devastated. It broke her heart. She felt like half of her had been ripped away because she saw Natalie as like a sister. And she said she just could not understand how anyone could want to do this to Natalie or to Carter. She said she hadn't met Carter, but Natalie had told her all about him, and he just sounded like such a good guy. And then there were the funerals. And as I'm sure you can imagine, funerals for 17-year-olds funerals in general are very sad things, but funerals for 17-year-old children are particularly heartbreaking. Natalie's funeral was at Roswell Presbyterian Church, and everyone was in tears. Several hundred people were there, and they were just in serious mourning because this is the type of thing that should not happen. Her obituary said that she was a free spirit with a gorgeous smile who could make your day or make your week. And Carter's funeral was at St. Martin's Episcopal Church, where his mother was actually a teacher. She taught 8th grade English, and 100 people were present, and many of his teammates who were there wore their jerseys in his honor. The headmaster of the school read a statement from Carter's family that said in part, quote, "His smile was a warm hug. Carter made friends easily and touched so many of us. Although his life was cut short, everyone in his life will remember how he loved the Lord and told them often he lived life to the fullest. And now he was gone. They were both gone, and police had to figure out what the hell happened here." So police had arrived at the scene, and they were very quickly able to put together that the two bodies that were found in the wooded area behind Publix were that of Natalie and Carter. And this scene was very jarring. It was very fucked up. There's honestly no other way to put it. It turns out that both of these kids' bodies were repositioned after they were killed. So Natalie was found totally nude in a suggestive position. She was laid with her legs completely spread, and she had a feather put into her hair. She also had a possible mark, like a burn mark on her big toe, which I've never seen explained. And as far as Carter, he was just wearing a pair of like shorts, like underwear, I believe, and his arms were stretched out to pose him like a cross. And he too had a burn mark, but his was on his left big toe. And both of them had been killed by a single gunshot wound to the head. So that's a pretty graphic scene to walk into. That's a graphic scene for anybody to walk into. But apparently in this area, double homicides were particularly rare. And this city was seen as one of the safest cities like in the state. So it was quite a lot for this local police department to tackle. But that's not to say that they didn't do the job, because they did the job and they did it very quickly. Because immediately they started going into overdrive. They were scrambling to see who did this. Was it somebody they knew? Was it like a stranger? And it seemed like it had to be somebody that they did not know, because nobody they knew that they were going to be sneaking out of their houses and meeting up together at this Publix in the first place. So it seemed like it had to be random. But it also seemed like it would be very hard to believe this was random because of how intense it was. Now, fortunately, in this case, it didn't take police long to at least have somewhere to start. And where they were going to start was with a car. So the car that they were looking for was a Honda Passport, which is like an SUV, a silver version of this car. That's like a weird way to say that. A silver Honda Passport was seen in the area of the murders around the time that police believed that the two kids had been killed. And this vehicle was distinct in a couple different ways. Notably, the vehicle that they had seen, because they saw this on surveillance, by the way, the vehicle that they were looking for had some visible damage to the area of the, quote, rear passenger side quarter panel, end quote. And there was a difference in coloring between the front and the rear wheels, with the rear wheels being darker. So this is two things that could help them narrow down from like all the silver SUV Honda Passports out there and like the one they were looking for, because there's not like a large chance there's going to be two that fit that description. Right. So police released photos of this SUV and to like the media and said that they wanted anyone with any information on this SUV to come forward and give them said information. But in the meantime, police sat there and sorted through data on hundreds of vehicles who fit that description. Sure. Across 2 counties. So they were very busy. Now, the car, that was great. That was a great lead. That was a great place to start. But they did have more to that because whoever had killed Natalie and Carter had also taken some things from them after they were killed. And one of the things was very important. And this was Natalie's card. It was called a debit card and a credit card in reportings, but I'm going to assume it was a debit card because she was only 17, but that is just an assumption. So apparently the person who had done this had also taken her debit card, had actually gone to her car and like reached in and got it out of her pocket, which is, I don't know why that note gets to me, but it does. So that was taken. And there were also jumper cables taken from Carter's car, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later. It doesn't matter quite as much. What did matter was Natalie's card, because again, Natalie's card had been stolen, and 90 minutes, just 90 minutes after the time that police believed they were killed, which was 3 a.m. They believed they were killed at 3 a.m. with the lead investigator on the case saying that nothing good ever happens at 3 a.m. Natalie's card was used at the Flash Foods gas station on Highway 92 in Woodstock. This was, again, just 90 minutes after they were believed to have been killed. So it wasn't Natalie using this card. Now, police got this lead super quickly because Natalie's family had been like monitoring her account, had seen the transaction, and had went to police and told them. So immediately they headed over to this gas station to see if they could find anything or to see if they could get their surveillance footage, which they did, to, investigate as investigators do. And when they looked at the surveillance footage for this gas station, what do you think they saw? The same SUV that they had seen at the murder scene was now at this gas station. So they were seeing that 1 + 1 really did equal 2. And even though they didn't have the license plate of the SUV, they were able to confirm that it was the same one based on the damage on the car. Yeah. And also the discoloring of the wheels, right? But they also got more information from this, which they actually did see this in the initial surveillance footage. But what they saw was a man. It was a young, well, they couldn't tell that he was young at the time. He was young, spoiler alert. A young man, shirtless, long hair, scraggly, wearing a mask, pacing around before pumping gas into the SUV and leaving. Leaving. My voice gave out there a little bit. I am endlessly sick. I've told you guys I'm sick. Apparently having a toddler means you're never going to be healthy again. So this is my voice now. I am so sorry. Now, let's talk about this mask, because he's wearing a mask in the surveillance footage. Now, have you seen V for Vendetta? Yes, you, specifically you. Have you seen V for Vendetta? Well, if you haven't, one, you should. Remember, the 4th of November, which is incidentally my birthday. But in the movie, the main dude, he wears a mask. It's a Guy Fawkes mask, and he wears it throughout the movie. If you haven't seen it, I will put a photo, okay? But this is the mask that this guy was wearing while he's pumping this gas, being erratic at the gas station. And he was also seen on surveillance around the Publix at the time of the murder wearing this mask as well, which is terrifying. Not that the mask itself is inherently scary, but to picture what these kids went through and then to think about the person who did it was wearing this mask at the time. For me, that's like a lot. And something about that makes it more scary to me. Anyways, moving on. Police were policing, doing police work like police do. And it didn't take them long to actually discover who this SUV was registered to. They were able to put that together like super, super quick. And it turned out this was a guy named Walter Hazelwood, which sounds very promising, and it is, but that's not to say that Walter was a suspect, because he wasn't. He didn't fit the description at all. He was a much older gentleman. It was not him. But they were like, because Walter had called the police and he had reported I think this was like 12 hours after the murders, he reported that one of his guns was stolen. Okay. And Walter had a grandson, and this was a 20-year-old man named Jeffrey Hazelwood. And Jeff, if you will, did fit the description of the person they had seen on surveillance. So they're looking into Jeff, and they're wondering if maybe there's a connection between Jeff and Natalie or Carter, because he is only 20, right? He's older than them, but he's not that much older than them. So they're like, maybe they did know each other. Maybe this was more of a personal situation. But when they're looking into it, they don't find any connection at all. Throughout this entire case, the biggest connection they were able to find is that Jeff may have known somebody that Carter knew. But Jeff didn't seem to know Natalie and didn't seem to know Carter, and none of their friends recognized him. But that didn't mean he wasn't somebody they wanted to look into, because obviously he was somebody they very much wanted to look into. So they put him and they put his car under surveillance. And in the meantime, they looked into him. They wanted to look at his cell phone records, which is where, I don't know if it's exactly where they started, but it's one of the first things they did, is they wanted to see if they could prove that his cell phone had been near the murder scene, or, you know, the gas station where Natalie's card was used around the same times that they were being murdered and Natalie's card was being used. And Shyamalan twist, it was him. I was going to say it wasn't him. It was absolutely him. They were able to see that his phone was both at the murder site and also where Natalie's card was being used, presumably by her killer, at that same time. So they're feeling pretty confident that Jeff is their guy. But of course, you have to prove it. So they start looking into him and they start to see that he is a dark guy. And they first notice this with his social media, or at least one of the ways they notice this is with his social media, because they get a lot more than just this. I'll tell you that. There's a lot to discuss about Jeff. But they do look at his social media and they see some of his posts are along the darker side. Like, for example, he had posted a photo on Instagram. I believe it was just one of those, like, it wasn't a photo of him. It was just one of those text photos that said, quote, "Eventually, the most kind-hearted person will grow cold. That's when you know they've been pushed too far." He also had photos of memes that read, "Love me or kill me," and "Your third face you never show anyone is the truest reflection of who you are." Then in one photo he posted of himself, he added the caption, quote, "Why the fuck should I live? Can't do shit right. All I do is hurt everybody, even the one I love more than my own life, and I swore to never hurt. I'm beyond fucked up. There's no one left." And below this photo, there was a comment from somebody. So somebody who was out there who at least cared about him, who responded to his photo and his like post about, you know, sucking at life, saying, quote, "You always have me, Jeff, no matter what." And I do wonder who this was, because the profile was like blocked off and that comment actually isn't there anymore. So I suspect this was his girlfriend, because he did have a girlfriend who we will get into a bit more later, because she does come up a little bit, but the point is I'm not going to talk about her too much. I'm not going to get into her name because I'm sure she would like to separate herself from this a little bit. But the point is he did have a girlfriend at this time. And I think it was literally the day after Natalie and Carter were killed. She had gone into his work. He worked at Michael's. They both worked at Michael's, but separate locations. But she had gone into Michael's to visit him at work, and he had taken a photo of her and posted it on his Instagram saying, quote, "Getting things at Michael's for the wonderful art she makes. I love you." And this was literally posted the day after the double murders that they believed that he had committed, and they're seeing this, and that just had to have been so wild. But it's just weird. It's just weird because there were just all these like normal posts mixed in with all these darker posts, and I guess that's normal for like a darker 17-year-old, but it just had to be very jarring to look at in this context, especially because I think it was the day after the murders. Also, he had posted a photo of himself like in a pool, just like so normal, saying that swimming was like one of the few things that could keep him down. And it's just like, it's hard for there to be such a disconnect. And we see this, we know that is a thing, but it's just like it's just jarring. It's jarring to me. Anyways, there is more to him. There is a lot more to him, and more to his childhood in particular and his mental health that we are going to get into a little bit later. I want to talk about the investigation a little bit more, but I wanted to show you like the clear disconnect in this person and like what he must have been experiencing to post things like that after doing what he did, because spoiler alert, like Jeff did it. So anyways, I mentioned he had a girlfriend, and it matters because of this next part, and also a little bit later, some more parts, but this in particular. So once they realized that Jeff was who they were looking for, as I said, they put him under surveillance. They put his vehicle under surveillance, and they actually found it, and they found that it was parked at his girlfriend's house. Eventually, though, Jeff left his girlfriend's house and drove over to Quick Trip on Woodstock Road in Cobb County, and it was there that police actually arrested him without incident. Well, it was without incident, but it was eventful. When he was arrested and he was put into the backseat of the police car, there's like a camera in there, and they caught on camera him like clearly in the midst of a mental health crisis or incredible acting, because he was having an argument basically with himself, but it seemed like he was talking to another person, going back and forth, having this argument, telling this person to like stay away from him and to stay away from his wife. So that is a bit odd. It's something to note for sure. But either way, he was arrested without incident, which is good. Nobody else got hurt here. and he was charged with 15 different counts, which included murder, felony murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, aggravated sexual battery, financial transaction card theft, identity fraud, theft by taking and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Now, once Jeff was arrested, which was super quick, by the way, I know I kept saying things were happening quickly, but they did, because literally 48 hours after the murders, Jeff was already in custody. And once he was arrested, they were able to search his car, and they found all kinds of stuff. They found a small gas can, and they found 2 long guns. They also found the mask, the same V for Vendetta mask that he had been wearing at the time that the crimes were committed. That was in his car. And they also found shell casings inside the car for a 9mm Sig Sauer firearm. Sig Sauer. I don't know guns, but it's like a semi-automatic pistol, basically. They were also able to get a search warrant for Jeff's grandparents' house, which is where he had been living for years, but had recently been kicked out of. And when police got to his grandparents' house and they were led to his bedroom, I guess they told him that his room was always locked with a deadbolt, and that Jeff had told them, like, never to enter his room under any circumstance. So that must have made them feel like they were really going to be walking into something. But they were and they weren't, because inside the home, they collected a ton of evidence like, quote, bodily fluids, blood, trace and DNA evidence, firearms, ammunition, shell casings. I went real Georgia there. Clothing with blood, electronic devices, or financial transaction cards in names other than Jeffrey or Jeffrey Andrew Hazelwood. So it sounds like he had other people's cards. And they didn't clarify that these were Natalie's or these were Carter's, but I mean, it seems like it's possible that they were, since we know hers was taken and we know they found somebody's card that wasn't his in his room. They also collected black jackets, electronic tablets, an iPad, a pair of boots, boxer shorts, and notepads with Jeff's writing, because apparently he really liked to write. This was something he did quite a bit, which was, helpful into looking into his mindset, because he had different writings where he wrote about him being, quote, schizo, and he also wrote about wanting to be an assassin and wrote about the specific steps he would take towards accomplishing that goal. Anyways, Jeff was taken to the station to be questioned, and he was questioned twice. And both times he was Mirandized. They did the whole thing. Everything that needed to be done was done. And though Jeff did seem to be going through a mental health crisis, because he was able to show to police that he at least understood what was going on enough to be questioned. Like, he was asked if he knew what a lawyer was, because he was like waiving his rights and agreeing to talk. And he said, one of those people he would see in court on TV. So with that, they proceeded. Now, he was an intense interviewee. He was very, very anxiety ridden. You could see it in his body. I watched the interrogation footage. You could see that he was very, very stressed out, particularly when distressing subjects were brought up. And the officer, the lady who was interviewing him, said of his behavior and his demeanor, quote, he shook his hand during part of the interview. When I confronted him on some tough subjects, he used a British accent and a very whiny type of voice to speak back to me, which I can confirm it was quite whiny. Anyways, he had a lot of outward physical signs of the anxiety that he seemed to be exhibiting, and feeling inside, his hands were shaking like crazy, very, very intensely. When the officer first came in to try to question him, she realized I need to calm him down so I can even make this successful in any way. So she spoke to him very calmly to try to calm down the agitation that he was feeling. He starts telling officers his, life story, right? He tells them that he had lived with his grandparents until he had gotten kicked out on the first. He said, the first was the night of the murders. He said that he had been at his girlfriend's house, and that after he had left his girlfriend's house, he had sort of driven around a while, looked around for a place to sleep. And then he kind of deviates from his story, and he's like, but something really weird happened. And the officer's like, what's that weird thing? And he said that even though he didn't like them, he had found a gun that night. That particular night, he had found a gun behind a gas station, which we know wasn't true because we already know that 12 hours after the murders, Jeff's grandpa, Walter, had called and reported that a gun had been stolen. So we know that the gun Jeff had that night was his grandfather's gun, but this is what he was telling police initially. He was then asked about the murders. The investigator didn't seem like she was being careful with him, but she didn't seem like she was going easy on him, right? Like she lowballed him, little easy question. Okay, so now let's talk about the murders, okay? And he said that he had heard about them, that he had heard about them from his girlfriend's mom, and that they were just horrible, absolutely awful, which the audacity is what I'll say to that. And the officer's like, oh, so you heard about them from the mom and it's awful. Okay, but here's the thing. We have you on video. Getting to the Publix, getting out of your car and walking to the area where the murders happened around the exact same time that the murders were being committed. So do you have an explanation for that? And it's at this point that he started aggressively shaking again. Like all the work she had done to calm him down was gone. And he said that he didn't want to say anything because it was just so awful. He said that there was blood everywhere. He said he saw blood everywhere. He said it was very dark and very bad and that he didn't do it. And he seemed very confused and very anxious when he was talking during this time. Now, shortly after this, his first interview just stopped. Like the interview was done. He had closed in on himself. They weren't getting any more information out of him. But he would be questioned again. He would actually voluntarily be questioned again, and they would get more out of him. But in the meantime, they were going to question his girlfriend/spiritual wife. And even though she is an adult, or she was an adult at that time, her mother was there with her when she was being questioned because apparently she's hard at hearing and also is subject to seizures. So she does later ask her mom to leave once the question gets a little more intense because she doesn't want her mom. Her mom kind of was like pushing her to answer, but also talking over her a little bit. So I think she was just like, can you leave? Which pissed her mom off. I'll tell you that. Her mom was like, well, that makes me mad. But she asked her mom to leave and then she was questioned by herself. She tells the police about their relationship, about how they met. She said the two met because they both worked at Michael's. They worked at two separate stores, and that they had met and just had recently started dating. They had only been dating like 5 months. But despite this, despite not being together that long, she was able to give them some insight into him and his beliefs and his mental state. She said that he believed in spirit animals and that he himself had 2 animals inside of him, a hawk and a wolf. And she said that he believed that hawks were protecting him. She also told police that he had been going through a particularly rough time recently and had even tried to take his own life. She said he had taken a bunch of pills and that she had found him and that she had revived him 3 different times, which is like a lot for anybody to go through. I can't imagine what that's like, but I guess she didn't even call the cops and she didn't call an ambulance because she said that he hated hospitals and that she was like going to nursing school, I guess, or like was a nursing major. So she figured she could handle it, even though after this OD, this attempt on his life, he couldn't remember things for like a week after. Now, the interrogator is very hard on her. It's actually sad. I didn't really like it. I felt like he was rude to her, but I also think that he believed that she knew more than she did. Not that she was involved, but that she knew more, even though I don't really think that she did, to be honest. But she was, it sucks, during the interrogation, she was able to put 2 and 2 together and figure out what he was questioning her about, because like the area wasn't super big and only one huge murder had happened in the area recently. And police had asked her about like weapons and guns and stuff. So she was able to put 2 and 2 together and was like, well, is this about the murders? And the cop's like, oh my gosh, how do you know about that? Like, you must know something. He must have told you something if you think that's what I'm questioning you about. But she really didn't seem to know anything. Not that he had done something like this, not that he could do something like this. She said the only thing she knew is that he felt one coming on, which she described as being one of his episodes. She said that he had had a knife and he said that he felt like he was going to hurt someone. So she just took the knife. And then she told police that like he does struggle from mental health issues. She tells the officer like Jeff has schizophrenia, but that she truly deep down didn't believe that he would ever hurt anybody. It was just that the voices in his head made him want to. And then she does let police know that he is supposed to take medication, but recently he had stopped. And this matters, and this will come up at his trial, as I'm sure you can imagine. So that's why it's incredibly relevant, and talking about her and her interview is relevant here. Now, let's get back to Jeff and his second interview. So he actually ended up having a second interview because he requested to speak to the officer again. And he does eventually in the second interview confess, but he starts by distancing himself and just saying that he was there, not that he did it. He claimed that that night he was actually with a man named Matt, that Matt was the aggressor. Matt was the one who made him do what he did because he felt like he needed to protect his family. He needed to protect his wife, which is the girlfriend we already talked about, and her family, because he considered them to be his family. It's very confusing because he wasn't, there's clearly something going on. So he says that he left his girlfriend's house and he met up with Matt. And he says that he met up with him, but he also says that he went to meet him specifically, but it is very unclear because his mind seemed to be very confused when he was telling this story. But either way, he says he ends up picking up this Matt person and that they're driving along, and Matt just says he needs a ride to go see this girl that he really loves, and that everything was, kind of normal, but that the vibes seemed to change, that this guy ended up getting Jeff's ID and telling him like, oh, well, now I have your name, and then threatening him and telling him he needed to do everything that he said, that Jeff needed to do everything Matt said, or he was going to hurt him. He was going to hurt his family. Okay. This is his story. He says he eventually made it to Publix, that's where the two were driving, and that's where he saw Natalie and Carter, and that Matt told him he was going to need to kill that girl and that boy, otherwise Matt was going to kill him and kill his family. So he did what he was told because he was scared. He said he didn't want to do this. He didn't want to kill these kids. He didn't want to hurt them. He said initially he just hit Carter, hoping that this would satiate this Matt person, but that it wouldn't. He's like, no, you have to kill him. You have to kill them. He said that he saw the bodies fall and that the girl wasn't wearing any clothes, and his story was just incredibly jumbled. And as he told it, he started saying I instead of just Matt. He started saying I. And that's because Matt was not real. Police had already looked at the surveillance footage and they had already seen that there was nobody there with Jeff. Matt was just in his imagination. So what really happened that night is that Jeff had been at his girlfriend's house and had left his girlfriend's house, had driven around for a while, and finally ended up at Publix, probably looking for a place to sleep because he had just been kicked out of his house. It was while he was there that he saw Natalie and Carter, who I believe, based on what I've read, were exes. They were just young kids. I think they had dated. It was kind of unclear online, but I did see it described as romantic, and I also saw it described as exes. They had snuck out of their houses to meet at Publix to be together. So when the two got there to Publix, they drove to the back of the store in their cars. And Jeff said that he had seen them get there and he had seen the cars drive to the back, and he was curious why they were going back there. So he got out of his car and he followed them. And this was confirmed to be true by video surveillance. On camera, you see two cars pulling behind the building, going out of range of the cameras. And then a minute later, a young man entering the frame on foot and walking out of the frame as well. Then 20 minutes later, you see him sprinting from the area. About an hour later, about an hour after all of that happened, you see Jeff come back wearing that mask. He runs into frame and he actually goes, and that's when he takes the jumper cables out of Carter's car. As I told you, they were stolen, but they weren't super important to the investigation. His story just confirmed it. And he took these jumper cables because he was worried his car would break down. But anyways, after following Natalie and Carter to the back of Publix, he says that he hid behind an electrical box and just watched them for a while to see what was going on. He said eventually he ended up climbing onto the roof of Publix to get a better view of Natalie and Carter because they were now in the backseat of her car. And he said that he's got onto the roof by scaling the wall like Spider-Man. Jeff said he spied on the couple for some time before eventually grabbing the gun that he had stolen from his grandfather's vehicle and approaching Natalie's car. Jeff says he went over to the car, he showed them the gun, and he told them to get out of the car. He said as Carter was getting out of the car, he hit him with the gun, which caused the gun to go off apparently, and one shot was fired into the ground. Jeff said that Carter was then pissed and he was yelling at him. He was cussing at him and pissed off because, hello, you've come to them while they're in this car in the middle of the night and you pulled a gun on them. And Jeff said that when Carter started yelling at him, he got scared. That Jeff got scared of this kid who's just freaking out because he has a gun pulled on him in the middle of the night. A gun that, Jeff, you are holding. And he said because he was scared, he shot Carter in the head, killing him right there in front of Natalie. And I cannot even imagine the fear that this girl felt, the fear that both of these kids felt. He then ordered Natalie to get out of the car. And she was only partially dressed at this point. She was wearing a t-shirt and underwear. And so he said when she got out of the car, he ordered her to take off the rest of her clothes. He then bent her over the hood of the car and he spanked her before he says he sexually assaulted her with his hand. though I just hope that this isn't true. I know that the autopsy didn't show any sign of sexual assault or anything like that, but I don't know if that act would have shown, and I just hope that it's not true. But this is what he says happened, and he says that when he was done, he shot her in the head too, killing her, and that she fell on the ground next to the car. It's just so scary because Jeff didn't know these kids at all. They had done nothing. There was no motive at all for him murdering them, but he did. And then afterwards, he posed their bodies in the way that police found them. So horrible. And, he was arrested. He was in jail, and he was being held without bond. But during the court proceedings, he refused to look at Carter and Natalie's families. And it seemed clear that he was going through something still. Like, he was handcuffed, but his hands were shaking, and he was like looking all over the room super fast from like one spot to the next. And another thing that was weird and noted is that he appeared to be like petting an invisible dog, and that he was wearing a wedding ring, though he had never been married. And you remember, he kept referring to his wife. But for clarity, because I was like, when I first read the reporting, I was like, he didn't have a wife. That's so weird. But he was referring to his girlfriend. Apparently, he said that they weren't legally married, but that they were married like by their religion. They considered each other husband and wife, which I guess is why he wore the ring. And he said that in their minds, they had been married since April 22nd. And she seemed incredibly important to him. She did. She seemed like this was the one relationship that he could rely on and that was solid to him. And that's why he clung to it so hard. And it was so important in his mind. So all of this erratic behavior seemed very intense, and to some it seemed like he may have been acting. But one of his people he knew, one of his friends, did give an interview with Crime Watch Daily saying that though this may seem like an act, it wasn't. This really was how Jeff was. And this friend also said that those who knew Jeff were not that surprised to hear something like this happen, because they knew he was a ticking time bomb who would end up either in jail or prematurely killed. Like, they were like, he's destined for trouble. But anyways, he came to court. He entered his plea. He was there a grand total of 3 minutes, just long enough to enter his plea of not guilty and be ushered out. And as I'm sure you can imagine with everything I said, Jeff's mental health and his childhood, all of that was going to play hugely into the trial and what people were going to be discussing. So with that, let's talk about Jeff. Let's talk about what happened to him. Jeffrey Hazelwood, who turned 20 just 3 weeks before the murders, was born on July 10th, 1996 to his mother, Sherry, who was just 19 years old, which is hard, but it is doable. We see young mothers killing it every single time. Well, not every single time, but we see every day that young mothers are capable, even though it's difficult, of getting shit done. But that didn't seem to be Sherry's mindset when having her son. Sherry just seemed to have a lot of her own things to work through, from her and Jeff's father separating when he was just a baby, like right when he was born. The dad dipped, to, well, I don't know if he dipped or she asked him to kindly leave, but he wasn't in the picture, to her dealing with her own substance abuse issues with drugs and alcohol. And she just exposed Jeff to like an ideal start to life, right? He saw a lot of horrible things. He was exposed to a lot of random men that she would bring in and out of the house. He was just exposed to all the types of things you wouldn't want a young baby exposed to. She was literally referred as a, quote, remarkably poor parent who didn't give Jeff a fighting chance. Now, Jeff's maternal grandparents saw this. They saw the condition that Jeff was being raised in. They saw the situation. They were like, this is not going to happen. So they actually got an attorney and they sued for custody of Jeff. And when he was just 18 months old, he was taken and he was able to live with his grandparents. This was Walter and Marcia in their ranch-style home in Roswell. Now, his grandparents reportedly did the best they could, but it doesn't seem like he got all that he needed, all the treatment he needed for the trauma that he endured at the hands of his mother, because it's not like the relationship was completely done. They still had a relationship. It was just described as horrible. Just 10 days after his 9th birthday, his mother, Sherry Hicks now, her name was now Sherry Hicks, she was informed. She was told that she had to do intensive counseling. It would be twice a month with her and Jeff together, and once a month just her by herself. And this is something she needed to do so that she could learn how to be a parent to a child with intensive behavioral issues, because the goal was that eventually they could be a family again. Now, I don't know how receptive she was to this. I don't know if she did what she needed to do for her son. She hasn't given any statements. The only thing I could see that could be indicative of whether or not she was interested in helping, which isn't necessarily true because finances don't have everything to do with how good of a parent you are, but I know she was ordered to pay $40 a week for Jeff, and that she didn't, and that her parents ended up like her parents, so the grandparents that had Jeff, ended up being owed like $12,000 before finally they sued her for this money because she just wasn't paying the $40 a week. And all of this, despite his grandparents trying to get him all the help they could get, he did still seem to struggle and had serious behavioral issues. And over the years, I think from 2010 to 2016, the cops were called on him almost 10 times. In one call when he was just 13 years old, the cops were alerted to come to the house because he was said to be standing in the front yard waving a gun. But luckily when they got there, they found it was just a toy gun. So they told him, like, don't do that, young man, and went on their way. In 2011, the cops were called again, and Jeff was reported missing after he left his grandparents' house and left a note saying that he wanted to go out into the wilderness and see how long he could survive. Now, this was alarming to his grandparents because the 14-year-old Jeff didn't take any camping gear, didn't take a backpack, but he did take his grandfather's gun. Luckily, though, everything was okay. Later that night, he was able to be found. Like, he actually called his grandparents and told them that he was just at his mother's house in Woodstock, and she ended up driving him home. But again, he wasn't following their rules. He dipped. He took the gun. I can't breathe. It's just concerning. And it's worth mentioning that all of this stuff that's happening, that's happening, and they're seeing behavioral issues at home with him, and they're seeing his temperament every day. So everything that might sound kind of benign to us isn't through the lens of people who are with him every day. In another instance, neighbors called the police on Jeff when he was seen in the front yard swinging a sword around and throwing knives. The neighbors, I guess, that saw this were concerned at the 15-year-old who had these weapons because, one, he's throwing weapons around and that's dangerous, and two, they had interactions with Jeff, so they knew that he was a bit of a strange kid. So the cops came and he told them that he was just practicing karate. So they just told him, like, okay, don't do that and don't trespass on your neighbor's yards, like in their lawns. Stay in your own property, basically. Now, the worst call came later in April of 2013 when his grandma called police because he had taken knives and a sword from their gun safe, and this scared her because about 6 weeks before that call, the then 16-year-old Jeff had come to her and he had told her he was going to blow and that people were going to get hurt, but he didn't know when and he didn't have a plan. So the cops came. He was questioned and he just said that, it was just thoughts he had and that he wasn't going to hurt anyone and he wasn't going to hurt himself. It was just stuff that he had thought about from time to time, but he didn't have a real plan to do it. Less than 2 years later, in February of 2015, Walter, Jeff's grandpa, called the cops and reported that one of his rifles, had been stolen. And Jeff was a suspect, but no charges were brought up at that time. So there were many calls against Jeff, many instances when the police were there, but there were never any convictions. He was never arrested, which in hindsight does seem like an issue, but at the same time, the cops are like, listen, we can't just put somebody in a hospital because he seems odd if he's not doing anything dangerous. So he had a lot going on. And people noticed it. His family noticed it. His aunt said like he had a lot of hurt or anger inside of him, but nobody could say what that was about. Only Jeff knew. Neighbors noticed it. Friends noticed it. Kids at school, they noticed that there was something about him that was just off. Jeff had gone to both the Compass Academy, an alternative school that allowed students to attend just 3 days a week, and then the Alternative Youth Academy, a military-style school. And a former classmate said that Jeff just didn't seem normal. You could feel that there was something different whenever you were around him, whenever you stood beside him. And then towards the end, his grandparents who had tried so hard with him had just had enough. Like, they were afraid of him. They were afraid he was stealing weapons. He was expressing both suicidal and homicidal thoughts. So they asked him to move out. They asked him to leave. And so for a bit, he was just kind of bouncing around, staying on friends and family members' couches and sometimes sleeping in his car. Now, why was Jeff's behavior so erratic? Well, it seems like it was a combination of mental health issues and trauma, because we've already discussed the trauma, but he was also diagnosed with schizophrenia, autism, and bipolar disorder. Now, this was an issue at trial, the fact that he had these mental health issues, because apparently when he was first arrested, he wasn't given his medication even in jail. He went like a month without receiving it, but eventually he did start taking it, which was good because I guess when he first because he got arrested and he got sent to a hospital. And when he was first sent to the hospital, he was said to be in like awful shape. They said he was incoherent, he was like hearing voices, and he had trouble even forming sentences. The psychologist who had been treating Jeff before he got arrested, I guess he treated him for 3 years and there had been over 82 sessions, said that Jeff really suffered from hallucinations. He would hear voices, sometimes they were friends, but sometimes he thought he was hearing the thoughts of demons. And he also had the belief that sometimes God would like send him messages through the TV. And he felt that sometimes people were watching him through the walls, that there were cameras in his room. And he also suffered from depressed mood. I don't know why that was so hard to say. Difficulty sustaining attention and like I can't pay attention. Apparently same. And also he had a lot of trouble sleeping, which doesn't help when you're already struggling mentally at all. So he had been on medication for these issues for years, but reportedly he had told his girlfriend, and he himself admitted, that shortly before the murders, he had stopped taking his medication. Now, Jeff's previous doctor was put on the stand because he was going to be questioned by both the prosecution and the defense with their, separate goals in mind. One of them, the prosecution, wanting to prove that his mental health did not play into the fact that the murders were committed, and the defense, of course, wanting to say that his mental health issues played heavily into why these murders were committed, and the defense was even trying to say that he wasn't competent to stand trial. But he would eventually be found competent. He received treatment after he was arrested at the Central State Hospital in Milledgeville, I hope. And after he was arrested, and the doctor he was given at the time said that he had shown great progress since arriving at the hospital. He initially said that Jeff was suffering from psychosis, but they were having trouble pinpointing his exact diagnosis. They knew all of his prior diagnoses, all the stuff that he had been diagnosed with prior to being arrested, but they wanted to, have their own opinion because everything is very subjective, and they were having trouble nailing that down. He did eventually confirm that Jeff did suffer from 5 different mental health disorders, and that these caused hallucinations, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. But with treatment and medication, he was competent to stand trial and understood, how court proceedings worked, etc., etc. Now, this definitely mattered. I think it did matter, but in terms of the legalese of it all, it didn't end up mattering as much because Jeff, though he had pled not guilty initially, he ended up changing his plea, and he changed it to guilty but insane. Jeff was led into the courtroom, and he seemed a lot more even during this time. He wasn't shaking. He was wearing this gray suit, and his long hair was cut short, and he didn't say much, right? He just said yes, ma'am, when answering questions, whether or not he understood the charges against him, whether or not he understood the amount of time he was going to get for these charges, and if he had taken his medication the night before and that morning, because those are all very important when he's literally agreeing to something that is going to change his life forever. But he said he did, and he was pleading guilty to a lot of charges. He was pleading guilty to 2 counts of malice murder, 3 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of aggravated assault, 1 count of kidnapping, 1 count of aggravated sexual battery, 1 count of finance credit card theft, 1 count of identity fraud, 2 counts of possession of a firearm during a felony, and 1 count of theft by taking, all related to the murders of Natalie and Carter. Before his sentence was read, the court, Jeff, they all heard victim impact statements from the people who cared most about Carter and Natalie. And we will start here with what Natalie's mother said in part. She said of her daughter, quote, "She will never graduate from high school. She will never experience college. She will never get to fulfill her dream of becoming an architect. Natalie will never experience the incredible joy and love of having children of her own. She will never get the chance to change the world for the better. As her family, we will never again hear her beautiful singing or hear her playing her guitar around the house. We'll never be able to hear infectious belly laugh or hug her tightly just as she did with us. Her daddy will never be able to give away her hand in marriage. No more opportunities to tell her how much we love her. No more trips as a family with her. Everything has changed." Next, Carter's mother gave a victim impact statement where she talked about losing her baby boy, where she said in part, quote, "What could he have become? What impact would he have made? How can I give words to the impact of losing a talented and smart young man, one who cared about a world and how we treat it? I think to Carter's great humble gift of caring for those who were picked on, had trouble in school, or was left out. He stood up to his friends and aggressors, never backing down but protecting, helping others treated unfairly. He helped kids do homework, make friends, and feel included. How can I say the impact that losing this voice, this kind of good and kind character is on our world? I can't." Which that broke my heart, dude. Victim impact statements always break my heart. And then the judge continued to break my heart even further, saying that he had been doing this a very long time, but there were only 2 or 3 cases that hit his heart as much as Natalie and Carter's did. And he said that the family's composure and their poise in handling the murders of their children were amazing to see. And then he said to the family, quote, the families, quote, Mrs. Henderson, you said Natalie would never change the world. She already has. This case will have a lasting impact on many, many different issues and causes. It may not have been the way she wanted to impact the world or the way y'all thought she would impact the world, but she has. And she's impacted every person that's been in this courtroom from the very first day that I handled this case. And she will continue to impact the world. I truly wish from the bottom of my heart it was a different way, but she has. To the Davis family, you indicated you found some light. Carter will continue to bring light. And just like Natalie has made a lasting impact on the folks in this courtroom, obviously on y'all's lives, but also sometimes on a failing system. And they will remain the inspiration, at least to this single judge, to do what she can to make sure these things don't happen in the future. I can't fix it. I can't pretend to understand it. And I can't imagine what you are going through. And you have my sincere, sincere prayers and condolences. That literally made me want to cry. And I think I said before that the judge was a dude, but I think that it was a lady based on her statement. I spaced a little bit. Oh God. But I guess it's just so sad. And Jeff, despite doing this, he didn't apologize himself. His attorney did apologize for him and his grandparents. His attorney said that he was remorseful, that at the time of the murders, he was struggling from visual and auditory hallucinations, but he was remorseful. And his grandparents said that they are just completely brokenhearted for Carter and Natalie's families, and that they feel like their hearts have been ripped out. I can't imagine the guilt that they feel. And I'm not saying they should, but I can understand why they would, because they just asked him to leave. But they couldn't have anticipated, right, that he'd do something this horrible. Who could? Honestly, who could? So with that, in March of 2017, Jeffrey Hazelwood was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. But because he pled guilty but insane, he will receive psychiatric care while in jail for as long as he needs it, which is probably the way these situations should be handled, because just because you were mentally unwell when you did something doesn't mean that you're not accountable for doing it. And that's tricky. It's very, very tricky, but it's like, can you really just let somebody out? We've seen that happen, and we've seen how that doesn't seem like justice. It seems like a very difficult thing that there's not a right answer to. But with that, he is staying in Baldwin State Prison, last I saw, in Midgeville. It's a city that I can't name cities if they're not from California, and sometimes even then. And it's been uneventful since he's been sent there, mostly. And I say mostly because I guess in August of 2017, so just months after he was sentenced and sent to jail, he actually somehow got access to a cell phone and posted a selfie of himself from prison. He literally took a selfie and posted it on social media. I believe it was on Instagram stories. It's just like him sitting up against a brick wall, like in a prison shirt. It's just like his face with no words, no context, nothing. And I guess a mom of a girl who Jeff knew before he went to jail, said that he was also messaging her daughter on Facebook. The jail's response was just like, I don't know what happened. I don't know how he got this, but apparently, and I didn't know this, contraband cell phones are a humongous problem all over the country, not even just Georgia. It's like a huge nationwide issue. Apparently there was this former prison guard, to illustrate this further, there's this former prison guard in South Carolina. And he came out after this saying he has a huge issue with contraband cell phones being in prisons, because in 2010, he had been a prison guard and he had confiscated a contraband package from a gang leader in jail. And this guy was able to get a cell phone and was able to use that phone to pay a hitman, $6,000, okay, through the phone and a green dot card to go to this correctional officer's house and try to kill him. So he did. The hitman went to his house, knocked on his door, and shot him over and over. I think he shot him 6 times. And he said he died twice on the operating table, but was just too stubborn to stay gone. So, though it seems small, Jeff having a cell phone in jail and taking a selfie, overall, this is a much more serious problem. I did not realize. It's just damn, I cannot even imagine. That's crazy. But, I just wanted to tell you this because even though it's not relevant in this case, because all I did was take a selfie, it does seem to be a larger separate issue. This case is just so tragic. The fact that something like this could happen to these 2 sweet kids. And it does seem like Jeff is insane. Or, that he does suffer from the ruling, the guilty but insane makes sense here to me. And I do think it probably played a role in what happened to Natalie and Carter. And that seems like an incredibly difficult thing to grapple with, especially for their families. It's like this horrible thing happened, but the person who did it wasn't really there, wasn't really mentally present when they did it. And that just seems hard. It seems very, very difficult to deal with, but I do think he is where he should be. I think that makes sense because I think two things can be true at the same time. I think he could have been sick, and I think he still needs to be held accountable because he took these two young kids' lives. At the end of the day, that's the truth. They're gone forever. And that's because of something he did. And I don't know. It just seems like a solutionless problem. And that is part of why this is so scary. But with that, my friends, is the story of the murders of Natalie Henderson and Carter Davis. I hope that you found it informative. I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Natalie and Carter with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. What do you think could have been done to prevent this? I saw this article of this guy saying that what should happen in cases like this, it was like some, professional saying in cases like this, what should happen is that a child who grows up in the type of home that Jeff was in should be flagged and be given like mandatory therapy. And I don't know if that's the solution. I don't know the ethics involved in that. So let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because we're open to suggestions here. We obviously don't know what the fuck to do. But anyways, guys, before you leave, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put your name next to it. So if I cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage. And I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And now with all that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. And I hope to see you in my next video.